All right, everybody, welcome to this episode of the Gilder Spotlight podcast. We have a very special guest today. His name is Ryan Hughes. He is the founder of Pier Labs and one of the newest Gilder members. But Ryan, I'd love for you to give a quick background to our audience.
Hey everyone, I'm Ryan. As was just introduced, I do run a company called Pier Labs. I've been working on it for 6 months now. Before this, I was working on a self-driving car company called Motional. I'm based right here in Boston, Massachusetts. Before that, I was working at a few small startups and some larger companies, namely Google and Snapchat. And before that, I was in college at Northeastern.
Well, kind of how I like to frame the Spotlight podcast is starting from the beginning. So, when you were kind of in your adolescence, did you always want to get into computer science? I noticed at Northeastern you studied computer science, and then you actually became an engineer. So was that kind of what you aspired to be? Was a engineer, or what were kind of like your main focuses?
Oh yeah, I've always wanted to get into engineering. Way back at the beginning, I did robotics back in high school, so I was kind of like very, software engineering right from the beginning. That was fun. We built these, robots. There's two big competitions back there. One's called VEX, one's called FRC. We did VEX, so you built these robots that are kind of, a foot and a half by a foot and a half by a foot and a half. They drive it around, pick up some pieces. So there's a lot of electrical engineering in there because you've got like motors and sensors and cortex, and you've got a mechanical engineering in there involved because you've got all these, manipulation systems, arms that you got to figure out how to pick up pieces. And then, of course, you have software as well because you got to write the code that runs on the robot. After that, went to college. Kind of knew I wanted to get involved in, software engineering and computer science the whole time. Went to Northeastern. They have a pretty strong co-op program. So there's a lot of people there focused on, software, getting jobs in the industry.
Boston Dynamics is probably a pretty good, you know, resource.
Yeah, and there's so many companies too here in Boston, and then also a ton of people go to California as well, and there's even more over there. So yeah, I was on the ladder there. I went off to California for some internships in the Valley when I was at Northeastern.
And you're originally from Boston too, right? You grew up in the Boston area?
I grew up outside Philadelphia.
Or
Down south.
okay, very cool. And then, so did Boston going to university, did that ultimately kind of shape your tech career?
It did, yeah. I did some internships at a lot of big companies when I was at Northeastern, and then I went back to them after I graduated.
Hmm.
And then after that, went to startups.
And so you started your career, and kind of let's go back to the beginning. I noticed that you were, so did you start your career actually at Google as a software engineer, or did
Yeah,
you
I
start
bounced around a lot back when I was in college. I did a bunch of internships at all sorts of different companies.
yeah.
So the first big internship I did was at Google. So that was Mountain View, California. I was working on the Chromecast Chrome extension. Wow, that was a while ago. And so it was cool, saw the big Google campus, and there was a lot of other interns there. You kind of see how.
There's that popular movie that came out like 10 years ago that was called The Internship, and it
Oh yeah, I've seen it.
guys, going to the Google campus and everything like that. What was your experience at Google like, and was it kind of like that movie?
Somewhat. It's been a while since I've seen the movie, but there's some things that are on point. Like they definitely do have really good snacks there.
Yeah.
And they do have the little hats with the windmills. Those are real. I've got one back in my apartment. But there's, I mean, a lot of the time when you're actually on the job is you've got work to do, and they don't really show that part in the movie. So, you're working, 5, 6 hours, 7, 8 hours a day, working on some code, and that's a big takes a lot of time.
Right. Taking breaks here. I mean, do they also have like yoga and like, amazing resources? Like I think they had like laundry and like sleeping pods, things like that too.
They do, yeah. They got a ton of stuff over there. I was a big fan of all the food. So they had freshly cooked meals 3 times a day,
Wow.
which was fantastic.
Yeah.
They had all sorts of various restaurants. So it wasn't just, they had some that was just cafeteria style, but they had some that was like, sit down, get a reservation, it's fancy,
Yeah.
and Google pays for it, the whole thing. They have a bunch of other perks there too, like I think they have a bowling alley there, or had one. I never went myself, and they have nap pods. Yeah, a
So,
lot of stuff.
working at Google and starting your career there, how was that environment like? Because I feel like Google, I guess, started off obviously as a tech startup in the early 2000s, and then now it's one of the biggest companies in the world. Was the work structure different than some of the other startups that you've worked at?
Well,
And can you
absolutely.
compare
It's
the two?
it's night and day. It's completely different. Google. used to be a startup, and the company's changed a lot from back when it was founded. Back when it was founded, it was definitely like gung ho, like let's build products, let's build products that are going to expand to the entire world. But now they're basically there. And so a lot of the kind of priorities at Google these days is not like how do we build new products. It's really how do we keep the existing market share. They have massive market share in advertisements and search. And YouTube, and that's where all their money comes from, all the revenue. So they have a few other ventures as well, but that's the big money makers for Google, and so they put a ton of time into just how do we keep those big money machines earning money. That's what I was working on when I went back full time. Um,
How do they manage, like, who kind of focuses on what type of priority or what kind of task at Google? Because why were you kind of assigned the Chromecast?
when I was an intern there, I was assigned. I was on the Chromecast team. I don't think there's a huge amount of. Let's see. I think it's kind of a long time ago. I think they do try to juggle like what people are interested, and then also like what teams have what needs and what teams have capacity to take on an intern, and then the teams have yeah. So they basically try to juggle those two things and see which candidate's the best fit for which team, and it's the same idea when you go back full time as well. So it's what teams need people. What are you interested in? If you're interested in working on this team, you can join that team.
Very cool. So as far as like, so you jumped in entrepreneurship, and obviously I think you helped build up a couple other startups in your career. And I think, building a team is something that's fairly difficult, especially in startups. What are kind of the key qualities that you look for as you're growing a team and as you're growing your startup?
Yeah, what a question. I mean, this is a bunch of things you got to look for. I mean, especially at like really early stage startups, which is what we're at right now. There's basically just three people that come into the office, and so you're going to be spending like a ton of time with these people. And so you need folks that are awesome folks, like people that you can hang out with on the weekends. I think that's what Y Combinator says these days, and I think there's totally value to that. You need people that are like hardworking, great people, people that know what they're doing. So that's kind of like the gist of it.
And so okay, so going back to, your career, you also ended up at Snapchat. Did you have this experience also in California where you work at, did you move to
Yeah.
California from Boston?
So after my first internship at Google, I went to Snapchat the following year, and I was there the year after that one as well. I went there full time too.
And you were at Snapchat after they went public, I'm assuming, right? I guess they went public in 2017 or 2018.
Exactly, yeah. My first internship was like just after they went public though.
Wow.
So there was still a lot of hype going on at the company. And it was super cool. Everyone was excited about going public. The company's changed a lot though. It's definitely gone kind of more formal ever since that happened. And kind of all companies kind of go through this transition where it's, like a hype startup and then it kind of turns into like, okay, we're a public company. We have, public investors. We've got to release financials publicly. And they get like people, they kind of settle down a little bit.
Right.
So, instead of spending money like, left and right, it's like, all right, we need to trim down on the finances a little bit, maybe less snacks,
Right.
focus on having a profit.
Right. Shareholders to basically have show the short-term profit maximization essentially. Right?
Exactly, yeah. So the company changed. They got new offices as well. So they used to be right along the beach in Venice in Los Angeles, California. So now they're in Santa Monica Business Park, which is inland a little bit. It's an office building, and so
What was it like kind of being at a company after it went public so recently?
it was great. It was a lot of fun. I mean, people were excited. There was more product lines coming out left and right. There was a lot of hiring for all sorts of different engineers.
Mhm.
It was yeah, a lot of great people we were working with. Yeah, no complaints at all.
Do you think, I think Snapchat's IPO was, I mean, I think it's higher than it is now. How do you think, I mean, from your point of view, being an employee, how do you think the management has been with Snapchat as far as the innovations that they're kind of going after?
Yeah, I mean, every company kind of goes up and down a little bit. No company just hits no company bats 1,000 in terms of like what products they release. And so Snapchat, if you look at their stock price over the last many years, it kind of goes up and then it goes back down again. And so they had a lot of hype when they were going up, and I think it's sputtered out a little bit. Uh, yeah, hopefully they do better. It works more going forward.
Right, right. Yeah, and do you think that social media is a good investment in the future?
No idea. There's always a lot of social media platforms. It's always like new hype social media coming out.
Right.
Yeah, I'd just be guessing. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, and what exactly were you working on at Snapchat?
I was on the privacy team the entire time I was there. And so that's the team that makes sure that basically, if you're an engineer in Snapchat and you want to release a feature publicly, you had to get approval from the security and the privacy team before you could release the feature publicly. And so we made sure that other engineering teams were making like correctly handling any sort of personal information that might be passing through their part of the code base, and we want to make sure that they don't have any security issues with their part of the code base. And so our team was kind of the team that did like the auditing of the other team's new features and code, and then gave them approval, and then they went to production.
Very cool. How big was the team at Snapchat? And how did they basically distribute their employees?
They have a lot of offices all over the place. The headquarters is in Los Angeles. They have a big one in New York as well. I think a lot of people work remotely. I know they've got one in Seattle too. I think they have offices all over the place too. There's probably some in Asia and Europe as well. So like a lot of the times when these companies grow, as Snapchat has done, it's they just get offices everywhere, and which is super cool. On the security team, there was kind of like the big security team, which I kind of forget. It's been a while, but at least a few hundred people, if not like 1,000 or so. And then in that security team, there was like the info like internal security team. There was the red hat team. I'm kind of blanking on the names of these teams. Might be fudging them a little bit. It's been a while. Absolutely, yeah, it really was. They put a lot of emphasis into security. They had a big HackerOne bounty program too, and they paid out like a ton of money to all sorts of people who could find issues, and then they could fix it as well.
Very cool. And just another kind of question, and I kind of want to dive into why did you end up becoming an entrepreneur? But the question that I kind of want to talk about before that is that obviously you've been in a position of execution, being an engineer, accomplishing milestones and tasks. And then there's also, being a founder, you wear the innovation hat a lot. So how do you find the right balance between execution and innovation, especially when you're leading a startup?
Yeah, so I guess maybe I'll first talk about like why I kind of left the big companies and went to a startup. And so some of the large companies, things just kind of move slowly. The projects I was working on at Google took like, many months to kind of launch to production because you got to write the code, then run an A/B test, that takes 2 weeks. You run another test, it takes 2 weeks. You get approval, it takes 2 weeks. You need changes, and so you got to go through the whole process again. So then you're like, 3, 4 months in and for just like a normal change. And then there were some projects that took 7, 8 months. So things just kind of move slow. And I'm very much the type of person I like working with the latest and greatest bleeding edge technology. I like a lot of decisions over what tools and technologies we get to use. And it's also super cool to just be able to pull in anybody you want to, like hire people, and then work with take on the types of projects you want to work on as well. And so that's basically why I joined the startups. Kind of left the big companies. There's a lot of opportunity in startups. It's super fun, exciting. You meet a lot of other super cool people too.
When you kind of took that leap, what were kind of the strategies that you did beforehand in order to take that leap in entrepreneurship?
I think there's so much in startups that you can just figure it out as you go. And so there's no like there's some preparation, some research you can do like while you're still at your full-time job. But like especially like if you want to make like a product-based startup, there's so much of it you'll just learn at like the accelerators. And I think another really great way to do it is just join an early startup. And so if you're thinking about like making a startup at some point or being the founder of some company, you can just join like some 10-person startup. And if that startup does extremely well in IPOs, like that's incredible. But even in cases where that startup doesn't pan out, you can still make great business connections there. You can learn a lot of the new technologies, and then you can use those business connection like people your network and a lot of the new tools and stuff that you've learned at some new endeavor. And so that's super cool as well.
Yeah, I 100% agree. There's always opportunities even with those, failed startup stories, you kind of take those, like you basically turn those into lessons and you learn a lot from them and then you can also build upon their network, as you mentioned. But yeah, and basically when you first started being an entrepreneur, what was like the first step? Did you start building your product? Did you start marketing? Did you start with customer, basically understanding what customers want,
Yeah, so
that
I
need?
took a slightly different approach. Most startups out there are product companies, and so they have some product that they're selling either to other businesses or to consumers. We're a services company because so we're like a software consulting for other startups, and so we take on all sorts of projects, and then we staff them with engineers, and then we work on the project. And so we've got mostly AI engineers, but we also have some like full stack engineers. So it's the day-to-day work is basically the same thing as working at a company, except in here it's like we'll have projects that are like 2 months, 3 months, and another one 6 months, and one's 2 weeks, and it's very chaotic, but it's super exciting at the same time. And so the way I started this was just kind of talking with a bunch of startups, going to networking events, I'm seeing what other startups were up to. Well, there was a little bit of overlap with my last full-time job,
Yeah.
just to see what they were up to, and then so I could really hit the ground running as soon as I went on this full time.
Wow. And that's it's amazing that you've been able to grow and kind of have some of the clients that you have. When you started out, how were you able to kind of establish the credibility to gain some of the big clients that you have?
Yeah, great question. I think a huge factor with that was just like our prior professional experience. And so, I threw up a website um, and put all the brand name companies that I had worked on in the past there, and I think that helped a lot. I also think that a lot of the initial projects that we did were just for people that I knew. And so I didn't have to like reestablish my credibility because they're my friends and I've known them for 5 years and they know, we're good. And so it's kind of a combination of we do some projects for, just people that we know. We do some, we put the brand names companies and that's kind of good enough. And then we can go from there to, some smaller projects for other startups and then from there to larger projects for other startups.
Yeah, I love that. I love that model, and I've talked to some industry leaders, and as far as the highest paid career that you can get into is an AI engineer. What does the average day look like for an AI engineer?
It's a lot of work.
Well,
The work that I'm doing now is it's much different than like what I was doing when I was a software engineer at a prior company. Because here, I mean, I run the show over at Vampire Labs, so I have to not only do a lot of the software engineering, but also financials and hiring and contract negotiation and sales and marketing and basically everything else that goes into a startup. And so it's a lot of the non-software engineering tasks like involve a lot more talking with other people. And so I've been days where I've like 8 meetings back to back to back to back in a day. And I'm like, am I a software engineer anymore? I don't remember having this many meetings. Like, what software engineer has 8 meetings in one day? But it's been great. Don't complain at all.
and what? Because AI is such a, especially like to the level that it's at now. I think it's OpenAI kind of made its waves in October, November of 2022. So it's been about 2 years since AI has been really taking over the world, so to speak. What were kind of the methods and tools that you did to learn about AI and understand it more?
Yeah, I mean, so much of these new tools, I almost take the same approach for any new tool that comes out. And it's just like try and use it for some project and think of some idea I want to build, and maybe it's a client project, maybe it's something internally, maybe it's just a side project, and just add AI to it because you feel like it and build it and ship it and go from there. And so there's no magic to it, just read the documentation is generally what I do and see how it works, play around with it, and give it a go.
And what are kind of the specific tools that you'd recommend, maybe founders to use as far as the AI tools and
Yeah.
resources?
Um, there's been a bunch of good ones. So obviously, OpenAI is great. It depends on the startup too. So we use a lot of OpenAI. We use a lot of OpenAI assistants. I played around with the real-time API. If you want to have conversations, that seems super cool. There's also other startups, have which have competitors to all of those. So there's Claude out there. Have also used Streamlit a little bit to help kind of build these AI apps, and that's been great too.
And what do you think the future workforce will look like with the utilization of AI?
It's interesting. Some people think it's going to change a lot. There's been some talks coming out of Silicon Valley where it's like, is AI going to take over all of our jobs? Are we going to need UBI? What's the future going
Right.
to look like? I think it's going to change things. I don't think it's going to change things suddenly by any means. I mean, I think it's just going to be, a kind of a slow, gradual change as basically any technology grows. It's kind of the same thing as any other technology. So when the internet came, it wasn't like all of a sudden, everything's online. It's kind of, very slowly like moves over to that. I think, but yeah, I mean, it's certainly a pretty big, significant new piece of technology that's come out recently. Or like probably the biggest new piece of technology in the last 20 years. And it's got a ton of potential for how it can impact.
And what specific innovations in AI have you seen that are the most unique to you and that have the most potential to make a big impact in society?
Yeah, I mean, I don't. almost want to bundle them. I don't want to pick like I
Yeah.
could say like OpenAI's real-time API is super cool, but then
Yeah.
like this it overlaps so much with like all of the other tools that they have. And I'm sure like behind the scenes they're using so much of the overlapping code base but to power like each any of these individual features. And so they're all super cool. I think like the base like the core idea of like having an LLM that can like just process text and has intelligence and can give you an answer. It's just super cool, and that single idea can be applied across just so many different technologies and products and industries. So you can take that same idea and use it for the real-time API, use it for the you know text photo, use it for the text to text. So it's super cool.
What, because obviously it's made an impact in so many different industries, and I think, uh, you know, the creative industry, the computer science, coding, developing, so many different industries and verticals have been impacted, like even, healthcare. Which one do you think is going to, I mean, are they all going to be equally impacted them like the same, or is there a specific industry that sticks out as far as utilizing AI?
Yeah, totally. So some industries are going to be slower, some industries are going to be faster. And I think this is kind of the same pace for any other new technology that comes out. Like
Mhm.
healthcare, for instance, has a ton of government regulations. And because of that, they tend to adopt new technology slower. There's some places in the healthcare industry that will still send you like a physical CD with like your X-ray results on it. And so I'm like, all right, well they're back in the 90s, I don't think they're going to be adopting AI anytime soon. But and then there's other technologies, other industries that are require a lot of like in-person work. Maybe if you're like a machinist, you have to physically operate the machine. It's still like many years away for AI to be, controlling robots that can walk around the physical world and do things. I know Tesla and some other companies are working on that, but it's definitely farther out than just AI that just controls a computer. And so I think that AI that is solely on your computer, you maybe just like writing blog posts, they'll probably be impacted the soonest, and then kind of the other things later.
Posts too, I think like a lot of people kind of leverage AI to help them kind of get more flashy LinkedIn posts that, for more engagement or blog
Exactly, yeah.
optimization.
I think it's just like anything that's on the computer. There's companies out there like Klarna that are using it for customer service, which is super cool. And so I think they posted something like a few months ago now that was like a huge percentage of their inbound customer service calls are just handled by AI. And so that's probably wild, and that's probably gonna be the case like many other companies as well.
Yeah, I know. I've seen it like a lot of AI sales innovations where literally they're having a sales call with someone and AI will prompt specific questions to ask the person that you're selling to and recommend specific selling points and things like that. So it's amazing that even yeah, there's a lot of different applications that that it can do, and yeah, it's absolutely amazing. But yeah, and what's kind of the biggest lesson that you've learned since starting your startup? Working with all these AI engineers, helping them implement cool technology and AI into their startups. What's the biggest lesson that you've learned?
So, I mean, let's see, there's so much that you learn when you go heads first into a startup. It's kind of hard to pick any specific thing. There's a lot you take for granted at larger companies that structure they have in place, process you have in place, tools and technology they're already set up. It's kind of like a double-edged sword. When you go from a big company to a startup, it's like yes, you get the freedom to set your own process and tools and technology, but you also have to do all of that, right? You have to set up the process and tools and technologies. You do learn kind of like what works best, what is less ideal. Um, and go from there. There's I don't know, it's hard to pick a specific thing.
Well, just kind of to end on a high note, Ryan, for the founders that are listening to this in our community, is there any piece of unconventional wisdom that you'd like to share?
I think like if you're already a founder, I think you're already doing the right thing. I mean, I meet so many people there, people just like out, in school specifically that are going after the big companies, which I did when I was in school. And I think like there's startups are really awesome. There's a lot of potential startups. There's a lot of opportunity there from like a personal career perspective, and then also from like a from a company perspective. And yeah, if I just had to pass anything on, it's like check out startups. If you're at all interested in startups, check out startups. Yeah, it's like it's different vibes for different folks, basically. Big companies can be great if you just kind of like chill, relax, and work 30, maybe 40 hours. Startups are more of a grind, but there's definitely more upside there too, and it's more exciting for sure.
I couldn't agree more. I think there's a lot more gain being in a startup, and it's a lot more rewarding too than being just a cog in the machine. And yeah, I really appreciate um, your time, Ryan, today in this episode of the Spotlight podcast. Is there anything else that you'd like to share to our guests?
Okay.
Well,
Thanks you for having me on.
thank you so much, Ryan. I appreciate your time, and I'll talk to you soon.
All right. See ya.
See ya.